When you think about how a country becomes what it is today, it often comes down to a few key moments, a few key people. For Indonesia, its modern story is absolutely a tale of two leaders. Two men who were incredibly powerful, but also couldn't have been more different. So today, let's get into their story, this journey from revolution and repression, all the way to the birth of one of the world's most important middle powers.
Okay, so picture this. It's August 17th, 1945. World War II has just completely upended the old colonial system, leaving this huge power vacuum in Southeast Asia. And right into that void step two men, Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta. With these simple but totally electrifying words, they declare independence and basically light the fuse for a revolution.
And this timeline, wow, it really shows you just how fast everything went down. In 1942, the Japanese invade, shattering 3 centuries of Dutch colonial rule. Then, literally just 2 days after Japan surrenders in 1945, Sukarno seizes the moment. But, independence wasn't just handed to him. It kicked off a brutal 4-year war against the Dutch, who were dead set on getting their colony back.
And the man at the very center of this storm is Sukarno. He is this charismatic revolutionary. He becomes the nation's first president, its founding father. But think about the task he had in front of him. How on earth do you unite a sprawling archipelago with thousands of islands, hundreds of different ethnic groups, into one single country? It's a monumental job. Well, after years of political chaos, Sukarno basically decided that this whole Western-style democracy thing, it just wasn't working for Indonesia. So, what was his solution? He called it guided democracy. Now, he sold this as a return to traditional Indonesian values of consensus, but let's be real. It was a pretty clear shift toward authoritarianism. Civil liberties got pushed aside, and all the power started to centralize right in his hands.
So, Sukarno has this massive problem. You've got 3 huge, often conflicting forces running the country: the army, powerful Islamic groups, and this rapidly growing Communist Party. How do you manage that? Well, his big idea was Nasakam. It's an acronym for nationalism, religion, and communism. The goal, at least on paper, was to force these bitter rivals to actually work together, with him, of course, right in the middle, pulling the strings.
And as you can probably guess, the goal and the reality were two very different things. The idea was unity, right? But in practice, it was this incredibly dangerous political tightrope walk. And in trying to keep everyone happy, Sukarno ended up massively empowering the Indonesian Communist Party, the PKI. So much so that it grew to become the 3rd largest communist party in the entire world, which, as you can imagine, put the army and religious groups on extremely high alert.
Yeah, you can probably guess that this delicate balance, it was never gonna last. It was all building towards one single, incredibly violent turning point, an event that would knock one leader off his pedestal and unleash a totally different one.
And it all comes down to this one question. What exactly was the September 30th movement? What happened that night?
So here's what went down. On the night of September 30th, a group of officers kidnaps and brutally murders 6 of Indonesia's absolute top generals. But the coup itself was kind of a mess. It was disorganized and it failed within hours. A surviving senior commander, a major general named Suharto, steps into the chaos, rallies the loyal parts of the army, and just crushes the movement. And immediately, he points the finger squarely at the communists.
What followed was a national tragedy on an almost unimaginable scale. This number, 500,000 to 1 million, that's the estimated number of people killed. The army, with the help of civilian vigilante groups, launched this terrifying anti-communist purge. And over several months, hundreds of thousands of alleged PKI members, sympathizers, and many innocent people were killed. It's truly one of the worst mass killings of the 20th century. And in the middle of all this carnage and chaos, Suharto moves decisively. He uses the crisis to sideline a now weakened Sukarno. He cements his control over the country, and by 1968, he's officially the president. He calls his new regime the New Order.
And that kicks off the 32-year reign of Suharto. His new order was built on a really clear, if brutal, trade-off. He basically promised the Indonesian people stability and economic development, but the price for that was going to be absolute political control and the ruthless suppression of anyone who dared to disagree.
Suharto's rule was really defined by these two sides of the same coin. On one hand, you had what many called an economic miracle. He brought in foreign investment, he got expert economists, and he cut absolute poverty from over 50% of the population to just 11%. I mean, that's incredible.
But on the other hand, you had a brutal, military-backed regime with systematic human rights abuses, zero free speech, and just rampant corruption that made his family and his buddies unbelievably rich.
For 3 whole decades, that trade-off actually held. As long as the economy was growing, Suharto's power seemed untouchable. But, ironically, the very thing that formed the foundation of his power, the economy, is exactly what would bring him down, and it would usher in a brand new era, reformasi, which means reform.
Right, so the beginning of the end comes in 1997. The Asian financial crisis just sweeps through the region and slams head-on into Indonesia. And the shockwave didn't just cause a recession. It ripped the lid right off the deep systemic corruption that had been propping up the new order for all those years.
I mean, just look at these numbers to get a sense of the sheer scale of the collapse. In just a few months, the value of the Indonesian rupiah against the US dollar plummeted from 2,600 to almost 15,000. Just imagine your life savings being completely wiped out, practically overnight. Businesses went bankrupt. The so-called economic miracle was exposed as a total house of cards.
So, in a desperate move, Suharto takes a $43 billion bailout from the IMF. But the deal came with some really strict conditions, like shutting down 16 private banks. Now, this was supposed to show financial discipline, but it had the exact opposite effect. It created widespread panic. People rushed to pull their money out of all the banks, and all that chaos turned public frustration into massive protests in the streets.
The pressure just became overwhelming. He was facing nationwide riots, massive student-led demonstrations, all demanding he step down. And so, on May 21, 1998, Suharto resigned. After 32 long years, the new order had fallen.
And out of the ashes of that new order came the reformasi era. It was a total transformation of Indonesia's entire political world. A vibrant democracy started to emerge, civil liberties were restored, the media was finally freed, and a whole new system of elections and decentralized power was put into place. So, from a fiery revolution under Sukarno, to a rigid, authoritarian order built by Suharto, and then finally, to a democratic movement born out of crisis, Indonesia's journey has been nothing short of remarkable. And that really brings us to the big question today. Having navigated all that turmoil, what's next for one of the world's most dynamic and important democracies?